Tantor Audio, a division of recorded books, presents Good Boys, Bad Hombres, The Racial Politics of Mentoring Latino Boys in Schools, by Michael V. Singh, narrated by Asa Siegel. Introduction. Supporting Latino Boys in the Era of Neoliberal Multiculturalism. On a warm spring evening in 2018, I attended a dinner celebration at a local country club. Under a vast white tent, perched on the edge of the golf course, Latinx families mingled with one another while helping themselves to a buffet-style dinner. Music played softly in the background, covering popular songs in genres like cumbia, merengue, and traditional Mexican rancheras. The host of this celebration was Pueblo Unido, a large non-profit community development corporation in the California city of Arroyo Seco. The night's festivities were in celebration of the boys and families of Latino Male Success, LMS, Pueblo Unido's Latino Male Mentorship Program that partners with 10 middle and high schools in Arroyo Seco Unified School District, ASUSD. LMS serves roughly 225 boys in ASUSD by offering each school a school day LMS course run by a single mentor who instructs students on good academic practices, teaches lessons on Chicano/Latino manhood, and serves as a positive male role model in the boys' lives. This celebration, described as a ceremonia, ceremony on the flyer, represented a rite of passage into an honorable manhood for boys who had completed a full year in the program. I had spent the last 10 months volunteering and conducting research with LMS, and the ceremonia marked the end of my first school year with the organization. It was the first of 2 school years I would spend volunteering with LMS. That evening, after reaching the reception area, I took an open seat and introduced myself to some of the families sitting at my table. Although this event did not mark an academic promotion for the boys who had participated in the program, the energy surrounding the dinner felt similar to a graduation. Some parents and students wore semi-formal attire appropriate for a wedding, while others appeared to have come straight from their jobs to attend the event. As I mingled with the families, I was happy to meet the parents and siblings of several of the boys I had worked with throughout the year. One mother raved about Mr. Ivan, a high school mentor I had been shadowing twice a week. She felt he had successfully kept her 10th grade son out of trouble by providing strong but caring discipline. Like her son, Mr. Ivan had grown up in North Arroyo Seco, and she made it clear that she saw Mr. Ivan as a wonderful role model for boys from the neighborhood. Un buen ejemplo, a good example. She only wished that her other son could have had a role model like Mr. Ivan when he was in high school. Another parent, the father of a middle school boy I did not know, remarked that he had admittedly thought LMS was simply a class at school and had not realized it was such a big deal. Un gran honor, no? He remarked, gesturing to the grandeur of the country club. As the ceremony began, the 10 mentors of the LMS program gathered the students from their respective schools into small groups near the front of the banquet tent near a microphone. Following a brief welcome statement by 2 LMS and Pueblo Unido administrators, the mic was passed to a student leader from each group. Speaking to the crowd of beaming parents, the boys expressed their gratitude to LMS for giving them the opportunity to be in the program and thanked their mentors for putting them on track to become hombres de palabra, men of honor, a term commonly used in program literature and curriculum. As one boy put it, his mentor truly believed in the man he could become. Following the boys' words, the LMS program director proceeded to introduce the evening's keynote speaker, Refugio Perez. "Hola familia, ¿cómo están?" shouted Perez as he took the mic. Refugio Perez is a young entrepreneur and motivational speaker. Throughout his short but productive career, he has worked for several of the world's largest corporations, including Tesla, Apple, Salesforce, Uber, and General Motors, as advertised on the LMS Ceremonia flyer. Perez is the author of motivational books, and his Amazon book page describes him as the epitome of the American dream and the truest definition of a bootstrapper. His most popular book, The Parenthood Guide, is a guide for parents to help their children overcome adversity through an entrepreneur mindset. His speech presented a vision of Latino male achievement that mirrored the values of the LMS program, one they hoped the boys and families would carry with them into the future. A charismatic speaker, Perez addressed the crowd primarily in Spanish, but he also switched to English sometimes to reiterate an important point or to specifically address the students. The speech began with a dramatic interactive activity with the crowd. Pulling out a crisp $100 bill, Perez proceeded to discuss the importance of perseverance and a winning mindset. He then asked abruptly, "¿Quién lo quiere?" Who wants it? And thrust the bill in the air. There was no answer. "¿Quién lo quiere?" repeated Perez, this time louder. "Yo," me, responded a few voices in the crowd. "¿Quién lo quiere?" shouted Perez, this time even louder. "Yo," boomed the response. Perez repeated the question several more times as the crowd's energy began to grow. ¿Quiere que subamos y le quitemos el dinero? Does he want us to go up and take the money? Asked a student's father. From the name tag on his oil-stained mechanic's shirt, I could see the man's name was Martín. He looked curious and captivated by the waving money. "No sé. I'm not sure," I responded. Finally, a young girl, presumably the younger sister of one of the students, ran up to the stage with the encouragement of her mother and snatched the $100 bill. The crowd roared. "As you can see, we are not messing around here," joked Perez in English. Perez continued his speech by sharing his own life story as motivation to the boys. He came to the United States at the age of 14 after growing up in rural Guatemala, where he had tended to cows and cultivated beans and corn. When he arrived, he spoke no English and was left alone as a teen to work and go to school. He faced adversity and tragedy, yet this did not stop him from trabajando por unas de las corporaciones más grandes del mundo, working for some of the largest corporations in the world. He then spoke in English to address the boys specifically. "So, jóvenes, young people, if you sometimes use the excuse that my parents are not around and that's why I can't make it, just know, if Refugio can make it without his father, then I can make it too. If Refugio made it without his mother, I can make it too. If he learned English with 3 girlfriends, I'm going to get 6. This last line sparked laughter in the crowd. 2 boys in the background gave one another a small handshake. Perez had referenced his earlier joke that when he was advised to get an English-speaking girlfriend to learn the language, he had decided to pursue 3 girls instead. Perez's speech lasted roughly 30 minutes and reiterated themes of individual perseverance, hard work, and a steadfast belief in the American dream. Beyond the content of the speech, however, there was a performative element to the keynote, intended to signal how an entrepreneurial mindset could ignite a physical transformation. As Perez's speech reached its final minutes, he began to slowly unbutton his casual shirt, revealing a clean and pressed dress shirt underneath. While continuing to deliver his message, he retrieved a bag from behind the stage and removed a necktie. He skillfully tied the necktie while maintaining eye contact with the crowd. He then removed a sport coat from his bag and put it on to complete his businessman ensemble. The crowd stood up and applauded what had been an exciting keynote speech. From across the hall, I made eye contact with Mr. Javier, a middle school mentor I had been shadowing throughout the school year. I knew him to be among the most politicized mentors, frequently teaching extracurricular lessons on racism and inequality. He shook his head softly, signaling his discomfort with the speech. As we passed by one another later in the ceremony, he stopped me for a moment. "We got to talk about the speech later, yeah? You know I'm not with that message." Despite the motivational message and drama of Perez's speech, behind the scenes of the ceremonia that evening, there was a deeper ideological dispute embedded in LMS's mentoring program. This tension, which Mr. Javier's reaction to the speech gestured at, is connected to larger debates surrounding the politics of supporting young people of color in schools. In the context of LMS, this tension arose from contrasting rationales behind the imagined purpose of the LMS program, and more complicated questions surrounding why and how Latino men are asked to be mentors and role models for Latino boys in schools in the first place. In Perez's keynote speech, entrepreneurialism and respectability were presented as foundational to the narrative of Latino male success. In his own story, Perez described how he overcame adversity through hard work and a no-excuses attitude. While his story demonstrates a classic version of the American dream, Perez offered a slight revision by focusing less on the opportunities given by the state and more on the global corporations for whom he had worked. These companies, which he and others named many times throughout the ceremonia, marked a new terrain in which young Latino men might find acceptance and economic opportunity. Through Perez's example and the story of his transformation, the boys and families of LMS witnessed the power of the program to change the trajectory of the students, as well as the students themselves, if they shed bad habits, avoided excuses, and invested in their human capital and potential productivity. Despite being presented in the keynote speech that evening, this perspective was not held by all the mentors at LMS. While some in the program strongly supported this goal, others harbored mixed feelings. The latter questioned if this was the type of social justice work they had hoped to accomplish as youth workers. Others, like Mr. Javier, were outwardly critical of the goals of LMS and its funders. These subversive mentors challenged the principles of LMS by teaching extracurricular lessons on racism and rejecting the idea that they represented this archetypical good role model that LMS promoted in its literature. Far from neutral, school-based mentorship programs for Latino boys like LMS bring to their projects an array of assumptions and values surrounding the root causes of the problems facing Latino boys, as well as the most ideal solutions to these problems. An enduring belief that threatens to overtake the goals of school-based mentorship, particularly in disenfranchised communities of color, is that individuals themselves are the primary sources of their own economic marginalization through poor choices and self-harming behavior. This belief, commonly known as the culture of poverty, asserts that social mobility can be obtained only when individuals take responsibility for changing the way they act. Yet this focus on individual habits and character excludes and denies the root causes of inequality in the United States: unequal opportunities, histories of racial exclusion, mass incarceration, systemic disenfranchisement along the lines of race, class, gender, and immigration status, and free market economies that produce wealth for a few and poverty for many. Although culture of poverty arguments have long been condemned as racist, a number of critical race scholars in education have pointed to a resurgence in deficit-oriented youth programming that focuses intensely on the character and actions of individual students, as well as the ability of educators of color to correct these problematic behaviors. These interventions can advance culture of poverty arguments even while seeking to be culturally relevant and authentic to the targeted community. At LMS, this was manifest in the way the program stressed personal responsibility and a no-excuses attitude among students. For LMS, success would be achieved through improving the character of its students and helping them adopt respectable and responsible life practices. Latino male respectability was to be modeled by LMS mentors and often intersected with the ability to perform dominant and heteropatriarchal images of manhood. In this book, I document how LMS, a large multi-school mentoring program for Latino boys, reproduced a deficit-oriented vision of Latino boys by centering an archetypical positive Latino male role model as the imagined solution to their educational struggles. However, this model, which helped shape a common-sense idea among students about how boys should perform Latino manhood, drew directly on visions of a hegemonic and heteropatriarchal masculinity and encouraged students to internalize personal struggles that were imposed on them by systemic racism. Throughout this book, I described the role model as a figure, image, or archetype. This framing challenges the notion that there are inherent or universal qualities conducive to a good role model. Instead, the image of this positive Latino male role model and its presentation as a good example for Latino boys in LMS was directly shaped by racial power. Intersecting discourses of race, gender, class, and sexuality, among others, converged within the notion of the role model and influenced how proper and productive ways of being for Latino boys were reimagined. This reconfiguration of Latino manhood, as I discuss in this book, is one of the consequences of the way LMS, like many other urban education programs, increasingly integrate neoliberal multiculturalist ideologies into their programming, while following racial and heteropatriarchal logics that undergird the perceived need for this kind of good example. At LMS, the mentors were presented to students as embodying an idea of success that drew on characteristics of personal accountability and hegemonic masculinity in the face of racism and structural inequality. These characteristics comprised a broader framing that positioned mentors to be dominant patriarchs who were successful against the odds, even if some did not see themselves that way at all. As I discuss throughout this book, this tension led the mentors themselves to struggle to understand their position as good role models, and in some cases, to reject it. But this inability or lack of interest on the part of the mentors to embody this ideal is also tightly connected to the broader context in which this good male role model for Latino boys has emerged, specifically the historical marginalization that Latino boys in the United States face in schools. Ultimately, the story of LMS highlights how ideological shifts in urban education influence how we make sense of the marginalization of Latino boys, and how successful lives for these boys are imagined. The 1990s and early 2000s saw an emergence of scholarship documenting the punishment and marginalization experienced by Latino boys in U.S. schools. In his research, sociologist Victor Rios has described how Latino boys regularly experience surveillance, microaggressions, and outright disdain on school campuses. Rios finds schools functioning as a key component of a larger youth control complex in which Latino boys' lives become defined by punishment and push-out. Rios's work joins a large corpus of literature describing the effects of the discipline and punishment experienced by Latino boys, black boys, and boys of color in school. Much of this literature describes the disciplinary processes in which schools and society reproduce the racist image of what Anne Arnett Ferguson has described as the bad boy. In contrast to the literature on punishment, however, Good Boys, Bad Hombres tells a slightly different and untold story of youth control in schools by focusing on the politics of empowerment and inclusion. In this book, I hope to shed light on the way affirmative racial discourses converge in youth empowerment programs to reimagine the problems facing Latino boys, as well as what empowerment should look like. In LMS, I found that Latino boyhoods are shaped less by traditional forms of punishment than through an invitation to a respectable and productive masculinity. This invitation to a positive Latino manhood was framed as authentic and culturally rooted in Latinx tradition. In this context, the archetype of the positive male role model, the good example that the mentors at LMS were framed as embodying, represented a unique blending of Latinx cultural signifiers with qualities conducive to a proper neoliberal subjectivity. This was posed in contrast to the notion of the bad boy that circulates in the boys' lives through social media, popular culture, and day-to-day interactions in their community and schools. The notion of the bad boy, a racialized figure of dark boyhood that is prone to delinquency and disinterested in education, served to warn against the deviant practices often associated with Latino men and boys, as well as blackness. In Arroyo Seco, bad boys were at risk of becoming bad hombres. Despite being framed as new and positive, however, I argue that the figure of the good LMS mentor who was positioned as an archetype of respectable Latino manhood was also built atop similar deficit-based ideologies. This paternalistic expression of empowerment functioned as a mechanism of control and conditioning. Here, male empowerment not only constructed Latino boys as potentially problematic, but also obscured the role of racism in the boys' educational struggles by imposing ideologies of personal accountability and developing empowerment strategies that, in some cases, drew on problematic dialectics of racial competition and anti-Blackness. Good Boys, Bad Hombres is a story that reveals a broader lesson about the way race and masculinity are woven into neoliberalism and how Latino boys and their families are affected by the concrete expression of that ideology in their schools. Through an ethnographic investigation into the framing and practice of a school-based mentorship program for Latino boys, this book shows how neoliberal multiculturalism and the turn to empower boys of color constructs a unique and contested vision for Latino manhood in schools and beyond. LMS in Arroyo Seco, responding to a crisis in the school district. Arroyo Seco is a large West Coast city known for its racial diversity and rich cultural expression. Although sensationalized in the media for crime and poverty, Arroyo Seco is the prideful home place for sizable Black, Latinx, Asian, and American Indian communities. Its many neighborhoods are vibrant hubs of cultural exchange, and political artwork and murals are sprinkled throughout the city. In North Arroyo Seco, the region located north of the downtown area, the city's demographics are primarily African American and Latinx. Among the diverse Latinx community, Mexicans and Mexican Americans are the largest demographic. They are joined by a sizable and growing population of Central Americans, primarily from El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala, many of whom are indigenous Maya. Like many urban centers in the United States, Arroyo Seco is presently undergoing rapid renovations to its previously deteriorated urban infrastructure to attract capital and investment. This revitalization has primarily benefited and facilitated the recent influx of middle and high-income residents, overly represented by white newcomers. The boom of local industries and reinvestment in the city has sparked rapid gentrification. U.S. Census data for Arroyo Seco reports a steady decline of particularly black residents since the early 2000s and a recent surge of new, higher-income whites. Despite the massive accumulation of capital in Arroyo Seco, as well as neighboring cities in the region, Arroyo Seco's public schools have remained impoverished and in severe debt. The schools continue to serve an overwhelming majority of students of color. The district is led by a diverse and predominantly non-white school board and superintendent's office. In the past decades, the district has been a battleground of neoliberal school reform. This has led to widespread community school closures, a sharp rise in charter schools, and fierce clashes between district leadership, corporate philanthropists, and the teachers' union. Latino Male Success was founded in 2010, and, as a school-based mentorship program for Latino boys, it has evolved within the context of Arroyo Seco's larger economic, demographic, and ideological changes. It was founded and is currently managed by Pueblo Unido, a local nonprofit 501c3 community development corporation whose mission is to improve the quality of life of Arroyo Seco residents, with a focus on its predominantly Latinx neighborhoods on the north side of the city. The LMS program is a relatively small representation of Pueblo Unido's overall efforts in the community, which include job training, annual community cultural events, housing development, and microfinance. Although it is under the jurisdiction of Pueblo Unido, LMS receives a small portion of its budget from Arroyo Seco Unified School District and is frequently portrayed in the media as a district program. The program was established in 2010 through a partnership between Pueblo Unido and ASUSD. When it was founded, LMS originally served just 4 schools. However, in recent years it has expanded to 10 middle and high schools, serving students ages 12 to 20 years old. Each school site was staffed with 1 full-time LMS mentor. Part of my research for this book included shadowing the mentors of 3 different LMS schools over the course of 2 school years, 2017 to 2018 and 2018 to 2019. ASUSD's decentralized structure can be categorized as a portfolio model of district governance, in which the district manages its community schools as well as a range of contracts with charter schools and school-based services run by external organizations, such as foundations and nonprofits. Pueblo Unido's LMS is one such external program partnering with ASUSD to offer school day services. The Arroyo Seco district selected the schools in which LMS now operates based on those schools' low academic performance as well as high numbers of Latinx students. Consequently, all the schools in which LMS operates are located on the north side of Arroyo Seco, home to the largest Latinx communities in the city. All schools partnering with LMS were ASUSD public schools with Latinx populations ranging from 32% to 71% of the student body. LMS class sizes ranged from roughly 15 to 30 students. This allowed about 6% of Latino boys in the overall school district to access the mentorship program. LMS mentors run period-long classes during the regular school day as either an advisory course or a Chicano studies class. In addition to running their 1 class period a day, or 2 if mentors separated certain grade levels, the broad and at times ambiguous duties of the mentors included maintaining contact with parents, conducting regular check-ins with students, and advocating for students among teachers and administration in academic and disciplinary matters. Mentors ranged from 23 to...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?